I didn't sleep well. That's how I want to start this, because I think it matters. I think the way a day begins tells you something about what the day is going to ask of you. And that morning, the morning of what everyone now calls the incident, capital I, like it's some kind of historical event that gets its own section in a textbook. That morning started with me lying in my bunk staring at the ceiling of dormitory block C and listening to the ventilation system tick. The academy makes a sound. Not a lot of people talk about that. You spend your first 3 weeks here just trying to survive the physical drills and the language modules and the protocol tests, and nobody tells you about the sound. But the station breathes. The Velthari engineers who built Veildor designed the atmospheric system to mimic a living rhythm, something like a slow, cycling exhale. They said it reduced aggression in multi-species housing environments. Maybe it works for them. For me, on my worst nights, it sounds like something enormous swallowing air. I'd been here 412 days. That's over a year, 14 months of being the thing that doesn't quite fit. I don't mean that as complaint. I've never been great at complaining. My mom used to say I process problems sideways, whatever that means, but I mean it as pure fact. There are 7 of us in human cohort 7. 7 humans out of roughly 900 cadets from 43 registered species. We are, statistically, a curiosity. Biologically, we are classified by the Academy's own intake forms as subgalactic, Category 3, stress response anomalous, which is a polite way of saying the medical staff didn't know what to do with our cortisol readings during the first fitness assessment, and had to bring in a human consultant from the Terran liaison office on Kelvanthos. That consultant was a retired colonel named Beatrix Varga who had short gray hair and a handshake like a closing door. She sat across from me during my intake assessment and looked at my stress markers and said, very quietly, "You're going to do something they don't expect." I thought she meant on the fitness course. I didn't think she meant what she meant. Anyway, morning of day 412. I rolled out of my bunk at 4:30 station time, which is earlier than most cadets wake because the human circadian cycle doesn't map cleanly onto the station's 19-hour rotation. My body thinks it's supposed to be awake at a specific time regardless of what the clock says, and I've stopped fighting it. I splashed cold water on my face. The water recyclers on our level run cold, not by design, just because nobody's gotten around to recalibrating the heat exchanger, since Cadet Prathak from Dormitory D accidentally shorted the temperature relay during a third-week electronics module, and I looked at myself in the reflective panel above the sink. I looked tired. I looked like someone who'd been working harder than she'd been sleeping. I'm 22. I know that doesn't mean anything in galactic terms. The Velthari alone have cadets who have been enrolled for what would be 30 human years, still technically junior classification. But in human terms, I'm 22. I'm from a small coastal city in what used to be called Columbia, and I grew up watching the first Terran Galactic Contact broadcasts on a tablet propped against a bowl of fruit in my grandmother's kitchen. I grew up knowing the stars weren't empty. I grew up wanting to be part of whatever came next. So I applied, and I tested, and I got in, one of only 43 humans accepted to the Academy in this enrollment cycle, 7 of us assigned to Veildor. And for 14 months I had been performing at exactly the level the Academy expected of me. Not above, not below. Exactly at. I was passing everything. I wasn't failing anything. I was, in the language of the Academy's performance tracking system, meeting benchmark with notable effort indicators. Which means I was working twice as hard as my benchmarks suggested I should need to, and barely staying current. Humans are new here. That's the thing people back home don't quite understand when they see the recruitment footage and the diplomat handshakes and the glowing statements about humanity joining the galactic community. We're new. We're behind. Academically, physically, technologically, every metric the Academy uses was designed around species who have been spacefaring for centuries. some of them for millennia. The Velthari have been operating military academies for longer than Homo sapiens have had written language. So yeah, I was tired. I had been tired since day one. I got dressed in the dark. Standard gray trainee uniform, the lighter material we were issued after they discovered the standard issue synthetic blend caused a mild contact reaction in 3 of the 7 human cadets, not me. But the academy did a full material switch for all of us out of what they called precautionary cohort uniformity, which I think was just academy speak for we don't want paperwork. I laced my boots the way my dad taught me. Double knot, never trust the first loop. Small habit costs nothing. I picked up my training tablet, checked the day's schedule. Range exercise, block 3. Designated weapons qualification refresher. Instructor Grevath overseeing. Standard issue pulse rifles. Cohort 7 participation alongside Velthari Cohort 12 and the Marnish exchange group from Sector 9. Standard routine. The kind of morning that shouldn't mean anything. I set the tablet down. Then I noticed the annotation at the bottom of the schedule. A small administrative note, the kind that gets generated automatically by the range management system when there's been a transfer of equipment between storage facilities. It just said, Range 7, restricted equipment transfer completed. Velthari Pulse Arms, Class IV, secured display only, do not handle. I read that twice. Went and made myself the closest thing to coffee that the Academy's nutrition dispensers can manage, which is a warm liquid that smells approximately right and tastes like someone described coffee to a machine that had never had coffee. And I sat on the edge of my bunk and thought about that annotation. Class IV Velthari Pulse Arms. I knew what that meant. Every cadet knew what that meant. You weren't supposed to know, technically. It wasn't in the official curriculum for Cohort 7. It wasn't flagged as required reading for our classification level. But this is a military academy, and military academies run on rumors the way engines run on fuel. You know things. You hear things. You put them together in the dark at 4:30 when the ventilation system is doing its breathing thing, and your brain won't let you sleep. Class IV, forbidden class for human cadets. Not because of politics. Because of what happened to Cadet Henriks. The cadet sustained severe bilateral nerve compression injuries to the right hand and forearm, consistent with uncontrolled discharge feedback from Velthari Class IV Pulse Arms technology. The firing mechanism of the Velthari KL-7 and higher designation pulse rifles is designed for Velthari physiology, which features a dual-grip stabilization system utilizing forefinger opposing tension and a wrist joint with 340-degree rotation capacity. Human physiology does not replicate these parameters. Human wrist articulation maxes at approximately 180 degrees. Human grip architecture distributes force differently. When Cadet Henriks engaged the trigger mechanism of an unattended KL-9 during an unsupervised range period, the discharge feedback, a standard recoil compensation pulse that Velthari cadets absorb through their wrist architecture, transmitted directly along the human median nerve pathway. Cadet Henriks lost full sensation in 3 fingers of the right hand. Partial nerve regeneration was achieved over 14 months of treatment. The cadet was ultimately discharged on medical grounds. Recommendation: all Class IV and above Velthari Pulse Arms to be classified forbidden class for human cadets pending physiological compatibility research. No human cadet to handle said equipment under any circumstances. Signed, Chief Medical Officer Talvreen, Academy Station Vaildor. I want to be honest about something before I give my account. I didn't like Mara Solis when we were first assigned to shared range rotations. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. Velthari cadets are told before they arrive at the academy that the human cohorts will be challenging to work alongside. Not in the way the instructors put it, they phrase it carefully. They talk about physiological adjustment periods and interspecies calibration, but we all know what they mean. Humans are new. Humans are behind. Humans require more accommodation. The range schedules get adjusted. The qualification targets get weighted differently. The instructors slow down demonstrations when human cadets are present because the reaction speed metrics aren't calibrated for our biology. I resented that. I'll admit it. I had worked extremely hard to get to Vale d'Or. My family has produced 3 academy graduates. My qualifying scores were in the top percentile for my cohort. And when I arrived and discovered that I would be sharing range time with a cohort whose qualification weights were set 30% lower than mine, I felt, I don't know the human word, dismissed maybe, like the achievement was smaller because the bar wasn't the same. So yes, I did not like Mara Solis. I did not like any of human cohort 7 particularly, though I was civil enough in shared spaces. I thought they were trying to be part of something they weren't ready for. I thought the academy was making political accommodations rather than merit-based ones. I want to say all of that first, so that what I say next carries the right weight. Because what I saw on day 412 made me feel something I didn't expect to feel. And the only way to describe it honestly is to start by telling you what I used to think. Document 4, Personal Log continued. Cadet Mara Solis. Written after the incident, reconstructed from memory. We assembled at Range 7 at 700. Range 7 is one of the outer ring facilities, farther from the main academy complex, quieter, the kind of place where you can hear the faint resonance hum of the station's structural supports if you stand still and pay attention. The lighting out there is cooler, more blue-white, because the designers apparently thought that was optimal for focus. I always thought it made everyone look slightly tired, or slightly dead, depending on the angle. There were about 60 cadets present. 28 Velthari from Cohort 12, the 7 of us from Human Cohort 7, and the Marnish Exchange Group, 12 cadets from the Marnish Federation, all of them taller than me by at least a foot, with that particular stillness Marnish species have where you're never quite sure if they're watching you or just standing near you while thinking about something else entirely. Instructor Grevath was already there when we arrived. Grevath is Velthari, 3rd generation military, the kind of instructor who doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't need to. His quiet is louder than most people's shouting. He had a posture that made cadets stand straighter just by proximity, like he was emitting some kind of correctness field. He went through the morning's agenda. Standard pulse rifle refresher. Qualification targets. A new precision drill that the Marnish Exchange Group was introducing, something they called graduated resonance sequencing, which I understood about 60% of from the briefing materials and intended to figure out the rest of during the demonstration. And then he gestured to the far end of the range. There was a rack, a locked rack, magnetic seal, red border light, the kind of containment that means look but do not touch under any circumstances. And on the rack were 3 weapons that I recognized immediately because I had done my reading and I had done my research, and I had spent enough sleepless 4:30 mornings with training documents on my tablet to know exactly what I was looking at. Velthari Kale 12 pulse rifles, 3 of them. Not Kale 9, which was what Henriks had touched. The 12, 2 generations more advanced, longer barrel, or what Velthari design calls a barrel. It's more of a focus chamber integrated into the overall frame. The grip architecture designed for that 4-finger opposing tension system. The wrist channel stabilizer built into the stock for Velthari physiology. The discharge feedback system calibrated for bodies that rotate further and grip differently than we do. They were beautiful, genuinely. I'd seen training images, but images don't capture the way pulse arm technology looks in person. There's a slight luminescence to the energy cells, a blue-white glow that pulses very faintly at intervals, like a slow heartbeat. The metal, not really metal, Velthari polymer crystalline alloy, catches light in a way that makes it look like the weapon is made of something that used to be alive. Instructor Grevath explained very clearly that these were here for visual familiarization only. Display, not handling. Human Cohort 7 was to observe, not touch. He looked at us when he said this, not unkindly, but directly, the way you look at someone when you want to be sure the message arrived. We acknowledged, of course we acknowledged. We weren't stupid. We knew what had happened to Henrix. The morning proceeded. We ran the standard drills first. I performed at my usual level, consistently solid, not extraordinary. I hit my target marks with the standard Academy Pulse Rifle, a composite 3 that's designed for multi-species use, and consequently doesn't excel for any single species, but works adequately for all of them. I finished each drill sequence within the acceptable window. Cadet Drovan Sath, from Velthari Cohort 12, was on the adjacent lane. He was fast. He was technically precise in a way that made watching him slightly unnerving. Every movement exactly where it needed to be, no wasted motion. The kind of economy of action that comes from thousands of hours of repetition since childhood. I'd watched him in previous range sessions, and felt that familiar mixture of respect and mild despair that comes from measuring yourself against someone who started earlier and has better tools. He glanced at me once during the qualification sequence. Brief. Evaluating, I looked back. Neither of us said anything. The morning continued. Then came the equipment review segment. Grevath moved the group to the observation area near the locked rack. He explained the KL-12 design, its history, its purpose, its technical evolution from earlier Velthari pulse arms. He lifted one of them off the rack, wearing the insulated handling gloves that neutralize the energy cell feedback during non-firing handling. He demonstrated the grip architecture. He pointed out the wrist channel stabilizer. He explained the opposing tension system, and why it allowed Velthari cadets to fire the weapon accurately at ranges and angles that would be mechanically impossible with standard multi-species arms design. He explained, with that same direct calm, why this weapon was classified forbidden class for humans. The discharge feedback, he said, is not correctable through grip adjustment. It is physiological. The Velthari nervous system routes the feedback through specific biological pathways that humans do not have. When the weapon fires, the feedback returns through the grip and the wrist channel. A Velthari shooter processes it naturally. For a human, the feedback has nowhere to go except directly along the primary nerve pathway of the hand and forearm. The result is immediate and severe. We lost a cadet to this. We will not lose another. 27 Velthari cadets nodded. The Marnish exchange group stood in their usual still-but-watching configuration. The 7 of us from Human Cohort 7 nodded. That should have been the end of it. That should have been the moment where the day continued according to plan, and nothing remarkable happened, and nobody wrote anything down, and 412 days of my life remained 412 unremarkable days. But then the alarm started. At approximately 8:47 station hours, the Eastern Perimeter Sensor Array registered an unauthorized intrusion alert. The alert was classified immediately as Security Level 2, unauthorized personnel within a restricted zone, non-hostile designation pending confirmation. The intrusion was subsequently identified as a group of 6 unregistered civilian observers who had entered the Academy station through a maintenance access corridor that had been improperly sealed following a repair operation the previous day. The civilians were later identified as members of a galactic press correspondent team from the Interstellar Broadcasting Consortium, attempting to document an unauthorized feature on Academy training conditions. Standard protocol for Security Level 2 alerts requires all cadets in active training areas to hold position. Instructors are to secure equipment and await security personnel. Instructor Grevath initiated hold protocol at 8:49. All cadets held position. Range 7 was placed in passive lockdown. During the lockdown period, an equipment malfunction was registered at the KL-12 storage rack. Magnetic seal relay reported fluctuation, later attributed to interference from the security system's elevated frequency broadcast, which conflicts with certain older magnetic containment designs at approximately 8:51 station hours. The rack seal disengaged partially. One KL-12 pulse rifle shifted position. What occurred in the subsequent 40 seconds has been classified, reviewed, contested, and ultimately archived as one of the most consequential training incidents in Veil d'Or Academy history. Document 6, Testimony. Witness, Cadet Lena Akefer, Human Cohort 7. Recorded, post-incident day 413. Mara and I had been friends since week 3. I know that sounds fast. Week 3 of Academy enrollment is basically still orientation. You're still figuring out which corridors go where, and which nutrition dispenser produces the least offensive approximation of actual food. But Mara is the kind of person you become friends with quickly because she's straightforward. She doesn't have a separate face for different situations. She's the same in the instructor's offices as she is in the dormitory corridor at 200 when neither of you can sleep. When the alarm went off, we were standing in the observation area. I was next to Cadet Yev from Human Cohort 7, Yusuf Yev. He goes by Yev, and Mara was slightly ahead of me, closer to the rack. Hold protocol means you don't move. You stand where you are and you wait. That's the rule. It's very simple. It covers almost every scenario. What it doesn't cover is the scenario where the rack seal starts flickering. And I mean visibly flickering. The red border light going from solid red to pulsing to something approaching off, and the KL-12 nearest the edge of the rack starts to slide. It was slow at first, maybe 6 centimeters of drift. The magnetic seal was clearly struggling. Whatever the security frequency broadcast was doing to it, the effect was progressive. The rifle shifted another 2 centimeters. The barrel focus chamber, whatever, angled toward the floor. If it fell, it would land firing side down on the hard composite flooring. KL-12 rifles have an impact-sensitive safety, but the safety is calibrated for Velthari handling, not for freefall impact on Academy flooring. The energy cell, partially charged for demonstration purposes, would almost certainly discharge on impact, in a crowd of 60 cadets in an enclosed space. I know that's what Mara was thinking because later she told me she wasn't thinking about the forbidden class designation. She wasn't thinking about Henrik's. She wasn't thinking about the discharge feedback or the nerve pathways or any of it. She was thinking, that thing is going to fall, and when it does, it's going to fire into a crowd. I saw the rack seal fail. I was close enough, maybe 3 meters, to read the relay indicator light correctly, red to pulse to near dark. I understood what was happening. I also understood that I was on the wrong side of the group to intercept. 6 cadets between me and the rack, and the lockdown protocol meant I couldn't move without authorization. I was calculating whether the discharge risk from an impact exceeded the protocol violation risk of unauthorized movement. This is a genuine calculation you make in military training. It's not as obvious as it sounds in retrospect. When Mara moved, she didn't hesitate. I want to be very precise about that because it matters for the record. There was no visible deliberation. The rack seal light went to near dark, the rifle shifted, and Mara Solis moved. One continuous motion, not 2 separate decisions. She crossed the 2 meters between herself and the rack in. I have thought about this often. I've replayed it 3 steps, maybe 3.5. She reached the rack as the rifle completed its slide off the magnetic mount. She caught it. One hand, right hand. She grabbed the weapon by the grip section, the main firing grip, Velthari 4-finger design, which her human hand cannot properly occupy, and she stabilized it before it completed its fall. I heard myself exhale. I heard several other cadets exhale. I heard Instructor Greveth say very quietly, Solis. Just her name. No command, just her name. And then Mara Solis looked at the weapon in her hand, and I watched her face change. Document 8 Personal Log continued. Cadet Mara Solis. I caught it. That was the easy part. I caught it on pure reaction, the same reaction that made me catch a falling glass at age 9 and broke my knuckle on the counter edge and made my mom simultaneously proud and exasperated. My hands do that. They move toward falling things. I've always been like that. But then I was standing there with a KL-12 Velthari pulse rifle in my right hand, and the room was completely silent, and I could feel the grip. That's the thing I want to describe, and I don't know if I can describe it properly, because I've never read a description of it that felt accurate to the actual experience. The grip of a KL-12 is not just a grip. It's an interface. The polymer crystalline material is slightly warm always because of the energy cell regulation system. And it has texture, deliberate, engineered texture, in patterns that correspond to the four-finger Velthari opposition system. Holding it with a human hand means you're holding it wrong. The texture aligns to nothing. Your fingers fall in between the designed contact zones. And yet, I could feel the energy cell pulse. That faint rhythm I'd noticed from across the room, up close in the grip. It was something I felt in my palm rather than saw with my eyes. A very slow, very regular heartbeat. The weapon wasn't fired. The safety was engaged. But the cells were active, partially charged, and the charged state communicated itself through the grip in a way I hadn't expected. It felt alive. I know that's not a useful technical description, but that's what it felt like. Instructor Greveth said my name, just my name, very quiet. I should have set it down. That was the correct move. Set it down on the range floor, step back, wait for security to arrive and resecure the rack. That's what the protocol says. That's what a sensible cadet does. That's what someone who has spent 14 months carefully operating within expected parameters, never drawing excessive attention, always performing at exactly the level anticipated, that's what she does. I stood there and felt the weapon pulse in my hand. And then I heard, and I realized this is going to be the thing that sounds most strange in a formal account, but it's true, it happened. I heard Cadet Sath. Not his voice, not actual words. I'd been standing next to him in range sessions for months. I'd watched him shoot. I'd watched the way Velthari cadets hold their weapons and fire them and absorb the feedback through their wrist architecture. And in that moment, holding the KL-12, I felt what the grip was asking for. It was asking to be held differently, not with more force, with a different distribution. The opposing tension system wasn't about strength. It was about the angle of resistance. The four-finger design created a specific vector of force absorption that ran from the grip through the wrist and up the forearm. With Velthari physiology, that vector terminated naturally. With human physiology, it terminated in the nerve cluster that had destroyed Henrik's hand. Unless you change the vector. I am not a physicist. I am a 22-year-old cadet from a coastal city in Colombia who grew up watching contact broadcasts on a tablet. But I spent 14 months in a military academy where every drill, every exercise, every waking hour is about learning how force moves through bodies and how you position your body to use that force rather than be destroyed by it. And standing there in range 7 with a forbidden class weapon in my right hand, I had a thought that I can only describe as geometric. What if the human wrist, without 340-degree rotation, compensates differently through the elbow? What if you don't route the feedback through the wrist at all? What if you let it travel up? I have supervised range training at Vale d'Or for 19 years. I am going to say that first so that what I describe next has appropriate context. 19 years, multiple cohorts, multiple species. I have seen cadets do extraordinary things. I have also seen cadets do catastrophically stupid things, which in a weapons training environment can look identical to extraordinary things until you reach the outcome. When Solis caught the rifle, my first instinct was relief that it hadn't hit the floor. My second instinct was alarm, because the discharge feedback risk activates the moment a human hand contacts the Kale series grip, even without the weapon being fired. The cells are always running. The feedback pathway is always present. I needed her to set it down before the accumulated contact exposure caused damage. I said her name. I said it quietly because I did not want to cause a startled reaction. In my experience, telling someone to drop a weapon loudly tends to produce sudden movement, and sudden movement with active energy arms is not something you want. She looked at me, and I saw something in her expression that I did not know how to categorize. I've thought about it many times since. It wasn't defiance. I've seen defiance. Defiance has a particular quality, a kind of braced anticipation for conflict. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was concentration. The kind of concentration I see on cadets who are in the middle of solving something. She shifted her grip. I opened my mouth to issue the direct order. Set it down, Solis. That is a direct order. And she shifted her grip in a way I had never seen a human hand approximate. Not the Velthari four-finger opposition. She couldn't replicate that. But she found a grip angle that distributed the contact force differently along her hand, using only 3 fingers in a way that, and I consulted with the Academy's biomechanics specialists afterward, who confirmed this, created a modified vector that bypassed the primary human median nerve pathway and rerouted the potential feedback through the extensor tendons of the forearm. It was wrong. It was completely wrong by every training standard I have ever applied. It also might have worked. I do not finish that sentence with might to be evasive. I finish it with might because what happened next is documented, and documented outcomes are not theories. She raised the weapon, one hand. The KL-12 weighs in galactic standard units approximately 4.2 krell, roughly equivalent to your human measure of 11 pounds. With 2 hands with proper Velthari grip architecture, it is a manageable weapon. One-handed, with human physiology, it should not be manageable. The leverage alone should have made accuracy impossible. She raised it one-handed, and she pointed it at the target array at the far end of range 7. The targets we had been using for the morning's qualification drills, standard range configuration. I should have stopped her, I know that. I know it in a way that the post-incident tribunal also knows it, and we have had that conversation at considerable length. But I am telling you what actually happened, and what actually happened is that for approximately 3 seconds, I did not move, because she had achieved a grip that should not have been possible, and raised a weapon that should not have been manageable, and was pointing it with a steadiness that made my 19 years of training experience go completely silent. I wanted to see what she would do. I have known Mara for the full 14 months we've been at the Academy. I was sitting next to her on the transport shuttle from the Terran liaison station on Kelvanthos, the one that brought us to Vale Door for the first time. She fell asleep reading a training document about Velthari weapon specifications, and when she woke up, she kept her place without a bookmark because she'd apparently memorized the page number. That's Mara, that's who she is. When she caught the rifle, I said, out loud in plain Spanish, a word I will not repeat in this formal record. Several of the other human cohort 7 cadets heard me, and I am told, had similar reactions expressed in various personal languages. When she adjusted her grip and raised it, I stopped breathing. Not metaphorically. I mean I physically forgot to breathe for several seconds. Lena Akaffer, standing next to me, grabbed my sleeve without looking at me, just reached sideways and grabbed it, the way you reach for something to hold when the ground might move. The range was completely silent. Not the quiet of people waiting for something to happen. The quiet of people who have stopped existing as individuals and become one collective held breath. Mara looked down the sights, the KL-12 targeting sight, which is a Velthari optical system not calibrated for human visual geometry, and she made an adjustment. I saw it. A small tilt of her head. She was finding her own alignment. She wasn't using the weapon the way it was designed to be used. She was using the way her eyes and her hand and her arm actually worked, and she was mapping that onto the weapon, rather than mapping the weapon onto herself. Then she fired. Shot 1, 085133. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 1. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 3 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 2, 085141. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 2. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 2 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 3, 085150. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 3. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 5 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 4, 085159. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 1. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 1 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 5, 085208. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 4. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 4 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 6, 085217. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 2. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 2 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 7, 085226. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 5. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 6 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 8, 085235. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 3. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 3 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 9, 085244. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 1. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 2 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Shot 10, 085253. Weapon ID KL-12 Unit 3. Target Standard Calibration Array Target 4. Impact Center Mass. Deviation from Optimal 1 mm. Accuracy Classification Qualified. Total shots 10. Total qualified 10. Maximum deviation 6 mm. Average deviation 2.9 mm. Note: Shooter ID not registered in system. KL-12 Unit 3 not authorized for use in current session. All shots recorded under anomalous event flag pending review. Document 12 Testimony. Witness: Cadet Drovan Sath, Velthari Cohort 12. Continued. She fired. I need to explain something first because I think it matters for understanding what the rest of us felt. The KL-12 produces a particular sound when fired. Not a loud sound, pulse arms technology is inherently quieter than the ballistic weapons some species still use, but a specific one. A sharp resonant crack with a trailing harmonic, like a bell being struck and then immediately dampened. Velthari cadets grow up with that sound. I grew up with it. It's the sound of the weapons locker in my family's house, the sound of my father's training sessions, the sound of proper equipment being used correctly. When Mara fired the first shot, the sound was identical. Not similar, not close, identical. The same crack, the same harmonic, the same clean termination. which meant the discharge feedback was processing correctly through the weapons system, which meant she had found a grip that allowed the feedback to complete its circuit without terminating catastrophically in her body. I heard myself say something. I don't know what language it came out in. Velthari has a phrase, no direct human equivalent, roughly translating as the thing that should not be but is. I might have said that. I might have just made a sound. I'm not certain. She fired a second time, third, fourth. Each shot in the same measured interval, 9 seconds between triggers, the standard Kale series cooldown cycle that Velthari cadets learn in their second year. She knew the cycle. She'd read the specifications. She knew when to fire. By the 5th shot, I was counting impacts on the target array, and I understood that she was not just firing, she was placing. Each shot was deliberate. The pattern was intentional. She was running through the targets in a sequence that covered the entire array, the way you do in a proper qualification drill. Not random discharge, not desperation. A qualification run. One-handed, 11 pounds of forbidden alien weaponry, one-handed. By the 7th shot, Instructor Grevath had apparently decided that intervening was, I don't know what his exact calculation was. He told the tribunal that he made a training assessment in real time and determined that interrupting an active discharge sequence mid-sequence posed greater risk than allowing it to complete. I think that's true. I also think he was, like all 60 of us, simply watching something that did not fit any category he had available. By the 9th shot, the Marnish Exchange Group, who are famously, legendarily difficult to impress, who have watched galactic military demonstrations for generations, who stand in that patient not quite watching way because they've seen almost everything. The Marnish Exchange Group was no longer standing in their patient way. They were leaning forward. By the 10th shot, the 10th clean qualified hit on a Class IV forbidden weapon fired one-handed by a human cadet who was explicitly prohibited from touching the weapon. By the 10th shot, the only sound in range 7 was the trailing harmonic of the discharge and the silence that came after it. And then Mara lowered the weapon. She looked at her right hand. I watched her look at it, checking, running her fingers, seeing what she had. Sensation test, I recognized it because I'd seen it in medical training, the systematic check for nerve response. Finger by finger, flex and extend. Then she looked up at Instructor Grevath. And in the specific tone of someone who has just done something they're not entirely sure they should have done, and is now preparing to accept the full weight of that decision, she said, "I'll take whatever comes next, sir. It was going to fall." Grevath looked at her for a long time. The targets at the end of the range still showed 10 clean center mass impacts. Then he looked at the rest of us. And he said, in Galactic Common, so that everyone present could understand, "Someone note the time, note the targets, and someone please reseal that rack before I have to explain to the Commandant why the forbidden class equipment is unsupervised." Cadet Mara Solis. They took the rifle, they resealed the rack. Security arrived, processed the civilian correspondence, filed their reports. The alarm cleared at 9:03. Nobody said much for the first few minutes. Instructor Grevath had us resume the standard qualification drills, which felt, I'm not going to say surreal, that's too easy a word. It felt like trying to go back to eating breakfast after something has landed in your garden that you haven't identified yet. My hand was fine. I want to be absolutely clear about that because the medical report will say it too, but I want to say it myself. My hand was fine. No nerve compression, no loss of sensation, full range of motion. The academy medic who examined me afterward, a Velthari named Hessel who is very precise and not given to understatement, looked at my hand for a considerable amount of time and then said, in the most careful voice I'd ever heard from her, "You appear to be uninjured. I would like to document that very thoroughly." I sat in the medical bay for 2 hours while she documented it very thoroughly. They pulled me in front of a preliminary review board at 1400. Commandant Rovas Ewell presiding. The commandant is the kind of person who makes you feel, upon meeting them, that the universe is more organized than you previously believed. They have a presence. I don't know how to explain it better than that. A settled certainty that the world should go correctly, and that they are the mechanism by which it does. I stood in front of that board and I told them exactly what happened. I told them about the rack seal failing. I told them about catching the rifle on reflex. I told them about the grip adjustment. And here I had to try to explain something that I had figured out geometrically in the span of maybe 4 seconds and had not actually processed consciously until after the fact. I told them I had rerouted the feedback vector through the extensor tendons rather than the wrist joint. One of the board members, an older Velthari whose name I didn't know, leaned forward and asked me to repeat that. I repeated it. He exchanged a look with Commandant Ewell. Commandant Ewell said, "Cadet Solis, are you aware that you have just described, spontaneously and under conditions of moderate stress, an adaptation of Velthari pulse arms feedback architecture that our own biomechanics research division has been attempting to formalize for 6 years in the context of developing multi-species compatible Class IV arms?" I was not aware of that. He nodded slowly. "No," he said, "I didn't think so. I have commanded this institution for 11 years. In that time, I have dealt with equipment failures, interspecies incidents, unauthorized experiments, cadets who pushed the boundaries of regulations in ways that ranged from creative to catastrophic. What Cadet Solis did falls into a category I did not have before. She broke protocol. That is absolutely true, and I do not minimize it. The forbidden class designation exists for important safety reasons, and a cadet cannot simply decide in the moment to set that designation aside based on her own in situ assessment. We cannot run an institution where cadets make those calculations individually. The Protocol Review Board addressed this with her formally, and she received an official notation. She also saved 60 cadets from the discharge risk of a Class IV weapon impacting hard flooring with active energy cells. The security systems confirmed the seal failure parameters. If the weapon had fallen, the probability of discharge was 78%. In a confined range with 60 cadets in close proximity, the casualty model was not comfortable. So she broke protocol, and she prevented a significant incident. Both of those things are entirely true simultaneously. But that's not actually what I think about when I think about day 412. What I think about is the board session at 1400. I think about a 22-year-old human cadet standing in front of a formal review board, the kind of session where people are usually frightened or defensive, and explaining to us, quietly, coherently, without a shred of showing off, exactly how she had geometrically solved a biomechanical problem that our research division had been funded to solve for 6 years. She hadn't read their research. She hadn't been briefed. She had a rifle in her hand in approximately 4 seconds and she worked it out. I have been in military education for decades. I know what trained looks like. I know what talented looks like. I know what the specific combination of preparation and instinct and refusal to accept the limitation in front of you looks like, because I've seen it precisely 3 times in my career. Cadet Solis is 22 years old. She is from a planet that joined the galactic community within her lifetime. She is one of 43 humans who qualified for Academy enrollment this cycle, and one of 7 assigned to Veil Door. She has been performing at exactly benchmark level for 14 months. After day 412, I reviewed her entire performance file, every drill, every qualification result, every instructor assessment. And I noticed something I should have noticed before. She was always performing at benchmark, never above. Consistently, persistently, exactly in 14 months of data. Either she had the remarkable ability to land exactly on her target every single time, Or she had been calibrating, watching, learning what the system expected, learning what everyone around her was doing and how they were doing it, running the drills not at her maximum but at the maximum the system expected, because going above it draws attention, and she was, I believe, not yet ready for the attention. Until she was. After the drills resumed, after the afternoon sessions, after the security logs were filed, and the medical reports were submitted, and the whole vast machinery of incident documentation was turning. That evening, I found Mara Solis in the secondary common room on level 4. She was sitting with her training tablet, reading something. I almost kept walking. I didn't. I sat down across from her. She looked up. She didn't seem surprised. She waited. I said, "How did you know the feedback wouldn't damage your hand?" She considered that. The question, she actually considered it. She looked at the table for a moment like she was reviewing something internal. Then she said, "I didn't know for certain. I made a calculation. I thought the probability was acceptable." I asked her what probability she'd calculated. She thought about it again. Then, maybe 70% in my favor. I stared at her. 70%, I said. You picked up a forbidden class weapon on a 70% confidence calculation. She shrugged. The particular shrug I later learned that Lena Ackafer has described as her trademark. The one that means, "I know this sounds unreasonable, but I did the math and this was the math." The rifle was going to fall, she said. That was 100%. I didn't like that number. 70 seemed better. I sat there for a while. I thought about 19 things I could say. I thought about everything I had assumed about human cadets in the 14 months I'd been watching human cohort 7 from the adjacent range lane. I thought about the things I'd felt. The resentment, the sense of diminishment, the quiet, persistent certainty that they didn't belong here on the same terms the rest of us did. What I said eventually was, "Your grip adaptation. The extensor tendon reroute." Yes. I want to understand it technically. The biomechanics. I have been trying to understand it all day, and I don't have enough physiology knowledge to reconstruct it from watching. She looked at me. Her expression did something I wasn't quite prepared for. It went from careful and measured to something warmer, something that was almost amused. "That's going to require me to explain some things about human arm architecture," she said. "Yes," I said, "I know. You'll have to ask questions when you don't understand." "I am aware." She put down the tablet. She pulled a blank notation screen toward her. She picked up a stylus. "Okay," she said. "So the key thing about human wrist articulation is that we're limited in rotation, but we compensate with." And that was how I spent my evening on day 412. Sitting in the level 4 common room, learning human anatomy from a human cadet who had just done something that should not have been possible, while the Academy's administrative systems worked through the night on the incident documentation, and the Commandant was apparently rereading 14 months of performance files, and the Biomechanics Division was filing urgent requests to review the footage from Range 7. The things I used to believe about human cadets, that they were behind, that they were accommodated rather than qualified, that the 43% reduction in benchmark weighting was political rather than merit-based. I turned all of that over in my head that evening while Mara drew diagrams of arm tendons on a notation screen and explained things patiently, and without any apparent need to make me feel the weight of my prior assumptions. I think she knew exactly what I'd been thinking for 14 months. I think she'd been watching it in me the same way she watches everything, carefully, completely, without letting on. She didn't say anything about it. She just drew the diagrams. Following the full review of the incident designated IEOC 7741, I am providing the following formal finding and recommendation for Commission consideration. Finding 1. Cadet Mara Solis, Human Cohort 7, did violate the Forbidden Class Handling Protocol under Academy Regulation 7, Section 4. Subsection C. This violation is noted in her permanent record. The review board has assigned a formal notation with attached commendation context, a notation with commendation, which is not a standard disciplinary category, but which this commandant believes is appropriate given the complete circumstances. Finding 2. Cadet Solis' intervention, while technically in violation of protocol, directly prevented what Academy security modeling classifies as a significant discharge incident with projected casualty probability of 78%, affecting 60 cadets across 3 species cohorts. Finding 3. The biomechanical adaptation spontaneously developed by Cadet Solis during the incident has been evaluated by Academy biomechanics specialists and identified as a viable, and in some respects superior, framework for multi-species pulse arms adaptation research. 6 years of funded research in this division have not produced a workable adaptation model. Cadet Solis produced one under pressure in approximately 4 seconds. Finding 4. Review of Cadet Solis' full 14-month performance record indicates a pattern of consistent benchmark performance that, upon closer evaluation, exhibits statistical markers inconsistent with plateau performance. This commandant believes, with high confidence, that the cadet has been deliberately managing her visible performance relative to expected benchmarks. This is not a disciplinary finding. This is, if anything, a finding of extraordinary tactical awareness of institutional dynamics, which is itself a skill of considerable military value. Recommendation 1. Cadet Solis be reassigned to Advanced Performance Track immediately, with full removal of Human Cohort 7 weighted benchmark adjustments. She is to be evaluated against full Academy standards. Recommendation 2. The Biomechanics Division be formally briefed on Cadet Solis' extensor tendon rerouting adaptation and authorized to pursue collaborative research with her participation on a voluntary basis. Recommendation 3. The Academy's Human Cohort Integration Policy be reviewed with particular attention to whether benchmark weighting, while physiologically justified in some areas, may have inadvertently created a structural incentive for capable human cadets to underperform visibly, rather than risk the complications of exceeding galactic species expectations in an institution where they represent 0.7% of the enrolled population. Recommendation 4. The footage from Range 7, 10 shots, 1 hand, KL-12 Velthari pulse arms, be retained in the Academy archive as a training document, not a training document about weapons handling or protocol. A training document about the specific mathematics of a mind that looks at a problem and finds the angle that nobody else found. 6 days later. My hand still works fine. I check it every morning, old habit now, flex and extend. Everything intact. The medic Hessel has seen me 3 more times for follow-up assessment, and each time has documented my continued lack of injury with increasing thoroughness, as if the documentation itself is what's keeping it intact. I've been moved to the Advanced Performance Track. The paperwork took 4 days and several levels of administrative approval that I was not privy to. And then Instructor Grevath told me quietly before the morning session on day 416 that my benchmark weights had been adjusted. He said it the way you'd say something that is good news, but is also a thing that comes with a new set of things to deal with. I understood. I am now being evaluated against full Academy standards, which means I am competing on the same metrics as Velthari cadets who have been in this institution for what would be, in human terms, a decade. Marnish cadets who come from military families spanning generations. Species who have been in space since before my species was writing things down. I should be scared of that. Objectively, I should be. 14 months at the weighted benchmark was genuinely difficult. Full Academy standards is a different level. But here's the thing. I've been watching for 14 months. I know the drills. I know the sequences. I know how Instructor Grevath signals the start of a precision drill versus a speed drill and how that changes the optimal approach. I know how the range monitoring system records accuracy and which parameters it weights heaviest. I know the qualification sequences for every weapon class in the standard armory, and a few that aren't in the standard armory, because I read the specifications at 4:30 when I couldn't sleep. I know what Drovan Sath does differently in his left-hand sequence compared to his right, that makes his left side targets consistently 3 millimeters off center, and how you could correct it with a stance adjustment. I know this because I've been watching him for months, and I think about what I observe. I've been calibrating, not sandbagging, that's not what I mean. I've been learning the terrain, and now I know it. The Commandant's recommendation said something about a mind that finds the angle nobody else found. I read that in the formal notice, cadets under tribunal review get the summary findings, and I held on to it. That's not actually what I think I did in Range 7. I don't think I found an angle nobody else found. I think I found an angle that was always there, in every human arm, in every person who ever tried to hold something designed for a different body, and figured out how to make it work anyway. Humans have been doing that since before we had metal, before we had science, before we had space. We have been picking up the wrong tool and holding it slightly differently and making it work because the alternative was that it didn't work and we couldn't afford that. That's not genius. That's not some special Cadet Solis thing. That's just us. That's just what we do. Something I want to add to the record, because I was there and I think it belongs. After Mara lowered the weapon, after the 10th shot, after she ran her finger test and looked at Instructor Grevath and said what she said, I looked around Range 7. I want to tell you what I saw. The Velthari cadets from Cohort 12, 28 of them, standing at various points across the range wherever the hold protocol had caught them. They were all, and I'm going to be specific about this, they were all facing toward the target array. Not toward Mara, toward where she had been shooting, looking at the 10 impacts on the 5 targets. Not looking at a human curiosity, not looking at an anomaly, looking at the shots. And the Marnish exchange group. The 12 cadets who had been maintaining their characteristic careful stillness throughout the morning, the kind of stillness that you read, after long enough, as a kind of professional patience. They were not still. They were, and this is the only word I have for it, alert, standing differently, engaged in the specific physical way that means something has commanded your attention, and your body has responded before your mind fully processed it. One of them, the group leader, I believe, though the Marnish don't have a formal hierarchy the way the Academy ranks it, stepped forward slightly, toward the targets, toward the evidence. And they stood there for a moment looking at it. Then they looked at Mara. And they did something I learned later is a Marnish formal acknowledgement. A specific gesture, something between a nod and a bow, something that carries meaning I don't have the cultural context to fully translate. One of the other Marnish cadets explained it to me later, haltingly, through a translation module. It means, roughly, I did not know you were this kind of person. Now I do. That's not a complicated phrase, but I thought about it for days. Because I think that's what the whole room felt in that moment. Not surprise, exactly. Not even shock. Something more like a recalibration, like a piece of information that changes the shape of what you thought you understood. Mara was still looking at her hand when they did it. She didn't see the gesture. I almost told her about it and decided not to, and then I told her 3 days later, and she sat quietly with it for a while. Then she said, I wonder what they'll think when they see what the rest of human Cohort 7 can do. And she said it the same way she says everything, like a statement of future fact, like a thing she already knows because she's already worked it out. We have reviewed the Range 7 footage, the target impact data, and the medical records from the post-incident examination of Cadet Mara Solis. We have also conducted 3 sessions with Cadet Solis directly, in which she demonstrated and explained the grip adaptation she developed during the incident. The following is our preliminary analysis, noted as preliminary because the implications are broader than any quick assessment can fully address. The adaptation works by changing the vector of discharge feedback absorption from a rotational risk pathway, which human anatomy cannot accommodate at Kale series feedback intensity, to a linear extensor pathway running from the grip through the extensor carpi radialis and into the upper forearm musculature. This pathway exists in human anatomy. It is not optimized for this purpose. It was never designed for this purpose in the evolutionary sense, but it is present, it is robust, and under the specific grip angle that Cadet Solis found, it is adequate to route the feedback without causing nerve damage. This has implications. Significant ones. For 6 years, our research into multi-species class IV compatibility has proceeded on the assumption that the primary obstacle is rotation, that species without adequate wrist rotation simply cannot process the feedback. Cadet Solis' adaptation suggests an entirely different framework. Rotation is the Velthari solution, but it may not be the only solution. The feedback, in terms of pure physics, needs to go somewhere. The question is where, not how far you can rotate. Human arms, we are now being forced to admit, have a pathway we did not adequately consider because we were looking for rotation equivalents rather than alternatives. We are recommending a full research pivot. Additionally, and I include this because I believe it is relevant to the broader conversation the Academy administration is now having about human cadet integration, Cadet Solis, in our 3 sessions, has not simply demonstrated the grip adaptation. She has explained it, clearly, accurately, in terms of both physical mechanics and subjective experience. She came to these sessions with questions, not just about her adaptation, but about Velthari physiology, about what the KL12 feedback is designed to do, and why the Velthari wrist architecture addresses it the way it does. She arrived at our 2nd session having read, overnight, 3 technical papers on Velthari neuromuscular anatomy that are not in the cadet training materials. They are specialist-level research documents. She had annotations. I want to note that in 40 years of biomechanics research, I have never had a research subject arrive with annotated specialist literature and good questions. We are recommending she be invited to join the research division on a collaborative basis, with appropriate academic credit toward her academy qualification. We are also recommending, quietly and informally, that the next time a human cadet does something that the system hasn't classified yet, someone in a position of authority, consider the possibility that the classification system may be the thing that needs updating. 18 days after. I have a meeting with the biomechanics division tomorrow, 3rd one. I've been preparing. There's a specific paper on Velthari pulse energy distribution that I want to ask about. Something I think might connect to a question Dovalreth raised in the 2nd session about why the extensor pathway doesn't attenuate the feedback more than it does. I also have advanced performance track drills at 700. My first formal qualification run under full academy standards is in 9 days. I'll be honest here, in this log that is now officially an Academy archive document, so hello to whoever is reading this. I am nervous about it in the way I'm nervous about things I actually care about, which is different from the way I was nervous for 14 months about things I was afraid of getting wrong. This is the good nervous, the nervous of real stakes. Droven and I have a study session Thursday. He's been coming to the level 4 common room most evenings. Sometimes other Velthari cadets come too. We have gotten surprisingly far on the question of multi-species grip architecture and also on the question of why we were not, prior to day 412, actually speaking to each other. The answer to both is more complicated than it looks. Lena told me about the Marnish gesture 3 days after I sat with it. I don't know if what I did in range 7 was brave or reckless, or some specific combination of the two that doesn't have a word yet. I've thought about Henrik's. I've thought about that a lot, actually. About the difference between what happened to him and what didn't happen to me, and whether the difference is the adaptation or the angle or just the mathematics of 70% versus 30. I don't have a clean answer to that. I don't think clean answers are the point. The Commandant's formal finding said, a mind that looks at a problem and finds the angle that nobody else found. I keep coming back to that. Here's what I want to say for the record as the person it was said about. I don't think I found an angle nobody else found. I think I found an angle that was always there, in every human hand. In every person who has ever been told this is not designed for you, this is not calibrated for you, this is not safe for you, and has looked at the thing in front of them and thought, but if I hold it differently? We've been doing that for a long time. We'll keep doing it. I lowered the weapon after the 10th shot and I looked at my hand and everything worked. Flex and extend, all present. And then I looked up at the range and I thought, okay, 14 months of watching, 14 months of learning the terrain. Now we go.